Seth, what's going on, man?
What up, Liam? How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Pleasure to be with you.
Likewise. Are you based in New York?
Yeah, I'm based in New York, although I have to be honest, in Jersey during the pandemic, our business is fully remote these days. So I'm out here in office space by my house in Montclair, New Jersey.
Got it.
We're getting that East Coast weather.
Got it. I think everybody's getting used to the remote lifestyle. Um, cool. Well, a pleasure to have you. We're gonna get going in just a second. I see
Great.
people are already popped in here. Booth on the beat. What's going on? Cloud9. What up? Eighth Life. My regulars are always on time. I appreciate it. I'm gonna give maybe like 20 or 30 more seconds because I know our text is about to go out. So some more people will jump in here. Any questions before we get started, Seth?
No, I'm good on my end.
And the last name is pronounced Faber.
That's right. Perfect.
Awesome. Good stuff, man. I dove a bit into your background. I'm sure we're going to have an interesting conversation around management and artist development, and then, what you're currently doing in STEM. So, cool. Good stuff. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. People will chime in. People will join us as they pop in late, as they always do. Today we are joined by the VP of Artists and Label Strategy at STEM. Correct?
Got it. You got it.
Awesome. And we had Milana on about this was a while ago. Probably 3 years. Probably been 3 years. So I know that the business has changed quite a bit, as most businesses have to evolve and change as the industry changes, to figure out, what your strategy and position is going to be in the market. How long have you been with STEM? Because you've had a couple roles, right?
Yeah, it just came up on 2 years, actually.
Okay, awesome. So you've seen quite a bit of change just over that 2 years then, huh?
For sure.
Cool. Well, let's start before STEM and let's talk about, I know you've been in the music industry, probably early 2000s, right?
Yep, been in since, actually, I guess technically college. I went to college for music business in the city at NYU. Series of internships and jobs after that across major record labels and at an independent publisher where I was for about a decade before coming to STEM. So I've been in it for a minute for sure.
Would you encourage young people today to do a more formal route in terms of going to school? And obviously there's tons of different ways to get into the music industry these days, but is that a suggestion for today?
It's a really interesting question, Dame. I think, there's more and more of these music business colleges or college programs popping up, and oftentimes they're supported by a well-known music business figure, whether you see like Jimmy Iovine and Dre building something or Clive building something, and it's really interesting. I don't think, even though I went to a program like that, I don't think our business is necessarily academic in nature, but I do think what the benefit really is of a program like that is that it gives you access. It gives you access to a like-minded creative community. It gives you access to staff who are often, people who are experienced in various sectors of the industry. And if you go to a program that is maybe in a major music market, if you're in New York, if you're in LA, if you're in Miami, it gives you access, obviously, to that scene. So, I often think there's a Bruce Springsteen lyric. It says, I learned more from a 3-minute record than I ever learned in school. And that's true to a certain extent, when it comes to the music business. But I do think that putting yourself in a position to be surrounded by people, by resources, by venues, by companies that you could intern at, all of that kind of stuff definitely gives you a leg up. But of course, college, that route is not for everybody, and it doesn't necessarily make it any more challenging for you to break a barrier into the business. but it does give you a little bit of of added access, and I think that's what's key. And you have to take advantage of it. You can't just passively expect to come out of the education and someone's going to hand you a job. You have to take advantage of the fact that you're there, build relationships, go to shows,
Right.
immerse yourself in the local music community.
Right. I mean, we've done a number of interviews at this point, and there's a common thread amongst everybody that's successful in the music industry in terms of just that level of proactivity, just putting yourself out there, building relationships, et cetera, et cetera. So whether you go to school or not, the qualities that seem to be a common thread amongst those that are doing their thing are the same.
Great.
Cool. So right out of college, where do you go?
So again, just taking advantage of the college experience. Um, During college, I interned at a couple different labels that were all under the umbrella of what was once upon a time um, BMG, a music group that later merged with and then was acquired by Sony. But I interned first for actually like the classical and jazz division of BMG, which was called RCA Victor. I was a marketing intern, all good. The advice for any intern is the same: ask questions, read everything you find on the copy machine, take advantage of being there for sure. Um, that internship ended. I dug it. I definitely wanted to um, work with a roster of artists, or at least be around a more contemporary part of the business. So I remember going to the person who was like the internship supervisor at BMG, and I was like, "Oh, this was a great experience, but I'd love to be, involved with artists that were, for example, alive."
Right.
So she hooked me up with a marketing internship at Arista Records, and this is the version of Arista Records that was run by L.A. Reid, and for a good period of time, was really on fire. Usher, Outkast, Pink, Dido, Avril Lavigne, um, really good stuff. So I did a semester in the marketing department there, and then I hatched a scheme that I felt really excited about. I thought to myself, I'm going to pitch myself to LA Reid's assistant and try to become an intern in LA's office. And I'll do anything, dry cleaning, you name it, whatever it takes. I'll be the errand boy. Again, just about the access, the ability to absorb what was going on.
For sure.
So going into a winter semester over the break, got in touch, made the play, got the internship. I was so excited. I went home to my family. Holy shit! I'm going to come back. I'm going to be working in LA Reid's office. I couldn't believe it. I log on to a website that I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with, Hits. Sort of a media, an industry trade slash gossip column,
Mm-hmm.
and I read that L.A. Reid was leaving Arista,
Mm.
and Arista was being folded back into the RCA Music Group under the leadership of Clive Davis. So I was so bummed, but I went back again, interned for that same marketing team. And as Arista sort of got broken up and put into, a lot of staff got let go, interns didn't get let go. You can't really let go of your interns. They're there for their college credits. So I got moved over to J Records, which was Clive's label after Arista that he founded. A marketing internship there to finish out my semester. And every day, just pounding on those HR doors. I'm graduating in 2 months. I'm graduating in a month. I'm graduating in 2 weeks. And I was lucky enough to graduate on a Friday and have my first job offer in the business on Monday,
Nice.
as an executive assistant for an A&R at J Records. And that was an amazing experience for a couple of reasons. The person that I worked for, his name is James Diener, really interesting entrepreneur in the music business. Aside from being a senior A&R at J, he also founded his own independent record company, Octone Records, which is the original Maroon 5 record label. It sort of gave me a lens into Clive. And even though it was an indirect lens, seeing, sort of one of the last great impresarios do his thing. This is at a time when, you saw Clive Davis in the hallway, you were an assistant. It was Mr. Davis, it was a more formal atmosphere, but a really compelling place to be. So I was an executive assistant for 2.5 years there. Went on to what was Island Def Jam when it was one combined company. After that, where I was a product manager and I did tour marketing. And then, and I think this is actually a cool lesson. I was sitting in my office one day at Island Def Jam and the phone rang, and it was a group of guys that I had interned for at that Arista internship a couple years earlier. And they said, we started this new publishing company, Primary Wave Music. When can you start? And I was like, guys, what are you talking about? I'm here, I'm digging it, all good. Like, and they were like, no, you don't understand. When can you start? And went over and had a conversation and was really compelled by the opportunity to work with them again, and help build this company that is now, Primary Wave Music, and, remains sort of one of the powerhouse indie publishers in the business, leading the charge on all these incredible catalog acquisitions that you see, and the feeding frenzy that's happening in the music publishing space right now. So what's, I think, cool there is literally I was there for a decade, and I'm sort of just one of those people that could point back a direct line back to my very first internship as to how I ended up, at least prior to STEM, getting to a certain place in the business, based on relationships and just having a good rapport with the right group of people. So from there, went over to Primary Wave, and I think I wore every hat you could wear there: publisher, artist manager, helped run their label business. And then 2 years ago, I got that hunger pang again for something maybe a little bit more techie, digitally focused, young. And Milana, who you alluded to earlier, who is our entrepreneur at STEM, our founder and CEO. She and I were chatting one day. We were just sort of friendly socially. She said, "Oh, I'm in New York. We should get together." I said, "What are you doing here?" She said, "Thinking about actually building out a presence on the East Coast, bringing somebody in." And I said, maybe I could be that somebody. And we sort of went from there and had a good hang. And she introduced me to Kristen, who's the president at STEM, and we all hit it off. And here I am, digging the STEM experience for sure.
Awesome. So you said you dabbled a bit. We'll get to STEM in just a second, but you said you dabbled a bit in artist management. So I wanted to talk about that experience for a little bit, just in terms of how you enjoyed it, what your approach was. So Primary Wave seems like they do everything, right? So you did a little bit of artist management while you were at Primary Wave.
Yeah, Primary Wave, great company. It's a company that's come full circle, company that raised money for the purpose of buying and exploiting or marketing song catalogs. And when the company was founded in 2006, it made a big splash because one of the first acquisitions that it made was the Nirvana catalog. And it successfully acquired a number of catalogs of that stature: Hall & Oates, Steven Tyler of Aerosmith, Maurice White, Earth, Wind & Fire, meaningful things. And eventually sold a number of those catalogs, ironically, to what is now the 2.0 version of BMG. But the core team at Primary Wave continued to do business thereafter and explored a couple of different routes, one of which was going into the artist management space. At that time, probably the flagship artist that the company managed was CeeLo Green. And I really dug into building out a roster of specifically dance and electronic artists and producers. So that's something I did for like 5 years there with a partner, Hosh Garelli. And we built up a roster of probably half a dozen EDM acts, including one that we literally took from living in his parents' basement, never being on an airplane in his life, to Grammy nominated, festival headlining, Vegas residency, having DJ. His name is Audien, Audien, great artist. And that was an interesting experience. It is, as any artist manager knows, um, it's a lot of work. It's babysitting. It's psychotherapy. It's you know, all kinds of things. It's being available 24/7. But what's great about artist management is two things. One, if you break an act, it's the most rewarding seat you can be sitting in, because you really had a hand in all facets of that artist's career. And if the relationship is right, you have a true passion for that artist's creative vision, and you share it. It's your vision too.
Right.
And the other thing, sort of tangential to that, that makes management great is having a lens into all these different sectors, all these different pillars of the business. You work at a label and you're an A&R guy. All right, great. Maybe you don't get the full picture of marketing, of radio promotion, of commerce and streaming, etc. And if you're a marketing guy, maybe you're not in the studio seeing how records are made or in writing sessions. But if you're an artist manager, not that you want to be the kind of manager that's like hanging around the studio, but you at least have a glimpse
Right.
into all the different parts of the process. And that includes touring, an artist's finances, negotiating deals, branding, all the different things that go into an artist's ecosystem. And while I'm not sure, I would want to spend the rest of my life as an artist manager, I definitely appreciate the experience and again that lens that it gave me into all the different moving parts.
For sure. How would you define breaking an artist? What is that? I mean, it seems to have. I don't know if there's any one definition, but how would you define when an artist has been broken?
So I think it depends on that particular artist's expectations, what it
Right.
is that they want to achieve. For some artists, that's a commercial definition. It's X amount of streams, downloads, chart placement,
Hmm.
ticket sales, etc. But for other artists, there's an artistic definition. It's certain things that they want to have accomplished, certain amount of output, collaborations, critical response, building a fan base that just loves what you do and is willing to ride with you no matter what it is you want to try. So I think it depends on what the artist wants to achieve. It's hitting those goals. I think the industry as a whole, though, thinks about it as um, thinks about it generally under sort of commercial, under a certain level of commercial success. So it's hard to define what that is. But if you're an artist that you're regularly streaming songs, 100 million plus, we're talking about an artist that's breaking.
Right.
If you're selling out venues of a certain size, we're talking about an artist, that's breaking.
Right, for sure. Okay, so let's talk about STEM, because I remember when I think I first spoke with Milana. STEM was at a stage where it was kind of, I think it was like a self-service distribution platform, and it was a percentage-based deal. And then I think they were taking like 5 or 10%, but it was
Yep.
self-service. And then I thought it was going to more of like a B2B model after that. And then you started working with like a smaller amount of clients, but
That's
like
right.
bigger artists. So can you talk to just about the evolution of the company, and then kind of where it is now, like what the current strategy is?
Sure. So you're spot on. You're alluding to what I think was a really pivotal moment in STEM's history, and it predates me. Um, but effectively, STEM was a DIY platform. You could use it, charged 5% distribution fee, etc. And it got really overloaded with artists that, although were making compelling music, etc., were were not necessarily commercially resonant. And so, as a means of survival to an extent, the company made a decision to pivot toward an invite only model so that they could focus its bandwidth on a smaller quantity of higher quality artists. Um, and so I think that was a challenging transition for the company in a lot of ways, but it's come out on the other side of it in a really healthy place. And now I think we're very grateful to be able to give each artist the attention that that artist deserves, and to know that every artist that's on the platform is coming into the platform is somebody that the whole team is really excited about, and doesn't just feel like we're all being handed a roster that is made up of artists that, or just want to get their music up. But we have a real understanding now of each artist's um, goals for their projects, how we can help lean into them, how we could support them, and we're not stretched too thin. We're able to really do it. So that feels good. And if you think about STEM, we're sort of in this middle plateau of independent distributors. If you think about it like this, the lowest rung of distributors are maybe businesses that are these DIY platforms. You pay a one-time fee or a subscription, they put your music out, that's the end of the relationship. And then at the top, you have large distributors that are maybe owned by major music companies, but distributing independent third-party labels or whatever. That would be like the Orchard, ADA, businesses like that, that are really set up like labels. They have the full marketing infrastructure. They're sort of labels just doing different kinds of deals. Then there's a middle rung where we are. I'm not ranking them in terms of effectiveness or what's
Right.
better or whatever, just sort of categorizing them. Businesses like United Masters and Create Music Group, 1RPM Video, and us. And it's a saturated space. Everybody's sort of jockeying for position, carving out what it is that makes them unique. And at STEM, our thing has been and continues to be a desire to give artists the financial tools that they need to run their own businesses, to be their own entrepreneurs, and to disrupt what we see as really unsavory accounting and payment practices in the business and in creator businesses in general. So if each of these companies has a point of view, our point of view is to be on the side of what's just when it comes to payments and accounting in the business, and to give our clients the tools they need to be successful, to be clear and transparent in that way. So as much as STEM is building a music distribution business, we're also building a payables platform and a fintech, a financial technology business. And I think that's where we're at.
Right. Why? Well, just from in your opinion, like, and I think we have answers to this question. Or might have different, or people might have different perspective. But why is that such a challenge in this industry? Like, there's so many tools and resources to make payments faster, so transparent. Like, and we've had access to these tools for over a decade. Why has the industry, when we did I managed some influencers, we did some stuff for the label about 4 months ago and just got paid for it. Like, why is this still a problem in your opinion?
It's a really good question. I think there's a couple of different answers, but among the answers are things like people. The music industry, I think historically, we would all agree, is like sort of slow to embrace change and slow to embrace emerging technologies. This is definitely an example of that. And the bigger companies get, and specifically I'm talking about the major music companies, um, the more challenging it is for them to adapt because they're sitting now on layers and layers of bureaucracy and complication around getting payments processed. And from having been a manager, and if you've ever managed an artist who's signed to a major label, um, maybe you get accounted to, for example, twice a year. And the current state of that probably looks like having to log into some sort of royalty platform or accounting platform online. And it's literally like somebody were to give you a copy of a phone book written in hieroglyphics and say, figure this out. And as an artist, maybe an independent artist without the means to hire your own business manager, trying to decipher um, what is being billed against your account, what you're earning, what you're recouping, all of that is really, really challenging. And we are getting to a place where you have to wonder, um, is it advantageous for big companies to embrace change, or are they purposefully slow to evolve because the current accounting practices play into their favor, allow them to structure deals a certain way, um, allow them to operate, a certain way. And I think there's probably a little bit of truth to that.
Right. Yeah, and it's probably protecting some jobs too.
Correct.
Cool. So I also work with a distribution company that I would say is kind of in your tier. I work with Foundation Media.
Cool.
So for the artists that believe that they are ready to work, maybe they're working with a self-service distribution platform, and now they want to work with a more and get some more support from a company like STEM. At what level do you think it makes sense for them to kind of make that jump from self-service to a company like STEM?
It's a good question. We look at it as far as what we're excited about that's sort of inbound, or things that we're chasing with a couple different criteria. Um, Definitely, we want to see something that already has some, is earning a certain revenue threshold, um, in terms of their digital earnings. For us, there's a little bit of fluidity there, but um, things where on Spotify might have north of, say, 500,000 monthly listeners, probably that's in the zone for us in terms of the amount of dollars that are coming in. That's one component. The second component is an important psychographic piece. We really want to work with artists that are independently minded and really convicted in that way. We don't necessarily just want to be the stepping stone platform for an artist who's maybe fallen out of a major label deal. They need to get some music out the door to hopefully sign the next major label deal. We want artists that want to stay independent, understand the value of independence, and want to be in control. We want artists that are surrounded by a healthy ecosystem. So you know what that could look like, Dame. Sometimes you get an artist who comes to you and says, "Oh, this is my best friend. He's also my manager. He's just a guy who has an iPhone." And it's harder to get excited about that as opposed to a manager that is reputable or that we've done business with before, that has a proven winning track record. Um, and then we also, would love to get a sense that there's some momentum in the marketplace. Um, that could be anything from, you know, touring success on some level to press, some blog coverage, to maybe some virality on a platform like TikTok, maybe uh, you know a cool artist cosign or collabs or something, something like that. It by making the by establishing ourselves as a company that wants to invite artists onto the platform. Of course, most importantly, we want to be excited about the music, but we also are removing ourselves from being at the stage where we're trying to rub two sticks together to create a spark. We are looking for momentum that we could lean into and pour fuel on. Um, so, so I think if an artist is on a self-serving platform and something starts to connect and they need a sounding board, they need a team to ideate with, they need somebody to help tell them what to do next, they need to take that momentum and amplify it or turn it into editorial looks on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Tidal, whatever. That's when they should start to think about making the move. If they're new to making records and they just want to get stuff up and they're a hobbyist or it's early days, they haven't quite identified sonically what their thing is, aesthetically what their thing is, they're probably not there yet for us.
Right. And let's talk, because I think what you talked about, like the people that are around them, the infrastructure that they have, um, is crucial, because obviously you want to work with people that do what they say they're going to do. They deliver things on time, have great ideas. I think that team is very important. I think a lot of times I see artists kind of undervalue that, and it's kind of related too. It's a lot of independent artists kind of work in their lane. They don't see what's going around them, and they don't realize, they start to believe that like they're the only ones doing what they're doing, right? Whereas somebody in your position or my position, I tell artists all the time, like, look, man, what you guys are doing is amazing, but don't let the ego get out of control, because there's a lot of independent artists exactly where you're at or bigger, much bigger. So, don't let that tarnish your communication, or let your ego get too big and kind of mess things up. Have you seen that? I've seen it happen a lot, but have you seen things like that happen?
I saw it as an artist manager. I see it a lot now. Artists have a mismanaged expectation
Mm,
of where they should be, how the sort of support they should be getting um, from platforms in the business. And I think there's this idea sometimes that just because you're making music that you're excited about, you think everyone else is supposed to give a shit. But you
mm,
know that's not necessarily the case. You have to earn and fight for all of those fans and for all of that support. So yeah, we see a lot of ego issues for sure, and it's like right out of a movie. Literally happens exactly like it would happen out of a movie. Artist gets excited about themselves, starts to make toxic decisions, starts to surround themselves with sycophantic people who just want to hype them up and say yes to whatever, not necessarily people that actually want to challenge them philosophically, creatively, etc. Um, and they drink their own Kool-Aid and more often than not crash and burn. Um, and one of the things we try to do is um, identify things that are heading in that direction and see if we could help course correct a little bit, or see if we could help manage expectations. It's really important for us to manage expectations, and I'll tell you one of the places where it's challenging. Part of what we do at STEM is pitch our artists for that coveted real estate at Spotify, Apple, et cetera, at all the DSPs, all that editorial playlisting and all those editorial marketing looks. We pitch for that and go to bat for our artists for that. And highly desired, extremely competitive. And every artist thinks just because they worked hard on their project that it's going to get there or it deserves to be there. And that's not necessarily the case. And the relationship that we have with the people who make those editorial decisions, with the people who advocate for artists within those DSPs, um, are precious relationships to us. And,
Mhm.
we have to act sometimes as a line of defense between artists or managers who think, they have something huge and reality. We have a ton of artists. Well, I wouldn't say we have a ton of artists, but we do occasionally get an artist who's like, hey, my song is blowing up on TikTok. And we're like, cool. How many videos are created using your song? And they might be like 20. Okay, so for them that's blowing up. For them that's really exciting. Maybe that's the biggest number that they've had.
Right.
But in the grand scheme of independent artistry, you know, that's not going to get anybody out of bed.
Right.
So we have to indoctrinate our artists to understand and to have that perspective of what what sort of impact is really moving the needle, within the entire landscape of artists.
Right. So, and when you're pitching to Spotify, obviously, the numbers, they might care about the numbers. What other things are they caring about? They caring about the story, caring about press. Like, what other things go into the pitch that hopefully kind of win them over at some point to get some of these highly coveted, editorial placements?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of different things, and each individual editor may react to a different thing. But one thing that they all have in common, one thread that is cohesive among them, is data. Hype, relationships. Maybe that could get you in at bat, but a song really has to speak for itself. Has to connect for it to really make its way around the bases. So that could be things like, listen, obviously they all want to be excited again about the music, but that could be anything from uh, numbers on a pre-save campaign that might be indicative of some sort of demand for a specific record. That could be, again, press and blog coverage. That could be things like other momentum an artist may have or other looks they may have around a project, a synchronization use. I mean, artists talk about sync all the time. Last night, we got to see the greatest examples of syncs over and over and over again in the Super Bowl commercials. And this morning, take a look at iTunes, take a look at Spotify. You can see how that's translating. Which records had syncs that are now charting. Syncs move the needle. They definitely can get folks excited. Um, uh, there's a lot of decisions being made with eyes as much as being made with ears.
Mm.
So again, something going on social media, on TikTok, on Reels, on YouTube Shorts, something on video that's popping off, all of that sort of stuff that shows a sign of life for a record, and sort of forward momentum for an artist, um, can really sort of compel one of those editors to want to support, to want to at least get you in the game, give you a shot, and then see what happens. But at a certain point, you know, if, there's a lot of sometimes people hate on this process, but the reality is, at a certain point, when you're talking about data, when you're talking about the science of all this, just like with radio, that song is either going to talk or it's not. And so you get to a place sometimes with the record where you can fight the data, but you you go down fighting. You definitely give it your all, every bit of spinsmanship you could think of, every angle you could find to keep momentum going, to resuscitate something. You don't want to give up on things, and you certainly don't want to be that team that pitches for the first week look and then moves on to the next. You want to
Right.
be telling that story retroactively and building and building and communicating. Um, But there's a number of variables that can excite, those editors, and but they generally, somehow, the stuff that resonates, it finds its way there.
Right. What I because a lot of artists come to distributors like yourselves and foundation with, I just think, unrealistic expectations, and we try to temper those and say, hey, it's not a guarantee that your stuff is going to get put up, the first time you submit a song. But for me, it's about, over to keep, as we keep telling your story and keep updating them with the wins that you're having, they're more likely to realize why they should pay attention. Right. So if we go to them one time, tell the story, cool, they might pass, interesting. But as you're consistently releasing music, and then the next time we go back and say, here's this music, and they also got this sync placement and this press, and they're going on tour, they might still pass. But then we come back again and say, well, they're doing this collab and they got this opportunity with the brand. And as we keep telling the story, hopefully at some point, you start to get some traction. But they got to be patient with the process, because it doesn't happen overnight. And it's easy to tell artists to be patient, but a lot of them, just like I said, they just think things are going to happen overnight, and they just got to be, consistently putting out music, and just stacking wins.
That's it. It's sometimes about making enough notches in the belt that
Mhm.
all those things add together to feel like something, um, to feel like something really real. And the truth is that what you alluded to, that consistency of content, is so key in this day and age when everybody's attention span is ephemeral. It's fleeting. It's on to the next, on to the next. If they're not looking at your thing, they're looking at somebody else's. So you always want to, have that next thing that's going to be in front of your audience of consumers on deck and ready to go. Are there established artists that can get away with making an album and disappearing for 3 years and then go? Of course. But for a developing artist, we're at this place where you need to constantly be feeding the beast.
For sure. So there's a lot of distributors out in the space, and I'm not gonna negatively talk about anyone. However, just in general, is there are there some things that artists should be looking out for to kind of stay away in a distribution deal? Are there some red flags? Again, not calling out any company, but just certain things to know, like, hey, this probably doesn't make the most sense for you. You should continue, using a
Yeah.
self-service distribution platform, or find another that doesn't have this part of their deal.
I'll tell you a couple things that um, would irk me as an artist manager if I was making these decisions. So, companies that flex about how much of the market share they have,
Mhm.
um, I think is a good look for them as a company from a business perspective. But if I was an artist manager and somebody says, we're responsible for putting out 50% of the independent music in this country, I would say, that's too much competition for me. How the hell am I ever going to become the priority in that big of a pool of artists?
Right.
Um, Companies that um, give you a menu of services that have additional fees attached. That's another one that feels a little bit funky to me. For another $250, we'll pitch your music. For another $500, we'll really pitch your music. It's that stuff is a little bit is a little bit um, is
Mhm.
a little bit funky to me. Um, I think that uh, you know you also want lately. This is one that I've been thinking a lot about. The idea that there are distributors that whose version of marketing is to run you through a playbook, a standard template marketing playbook, with very little regard for what you as an artist are about and are trying to accomplish and who your audience is. So I'll give you an example, but without using a particular name. Um, you might be an artist signed to a distributor who tells you, oh, you're interested in radio, we'll send your song, we'll work your song at radio. Um, and they may have a radio department that's staffed by somebody who's not even in the genre, whose background is not even the genre of the type of music you are. And what they'll do is they'll spend a little bit of money to buy radio spins, which sadly is still a practice that can happen. It's, there's a little bit of an end around. It's not the way it used to be, but it does happen that way. And they'll buy spins for you in bullshit markets at overnight day parts, times of day where nobody's really listening to the radio. And
Right.
they'll show it to you as, hey, look, we got your song played 5 times, at this radio station. And then you get really excited, but then you realize, okay, what did that cost? What's being billed against my account now? And what did it really do for me to have my song played 5 times in Bumblefuck at 4 a.m. in the morning? And now all of a sudden I'm another 10 grand in the hole.
Right.
So this sort of like, oh, we know what to do. We're going to run you through that template. We're going to just go through the motions of satisfying you without surgically understanding what it is that you specifically need and whether or not you could achieve that for the client, or you need to lean on a third-party resource, I think is another thing that I see that gives me the creeps a little bit.
For sure. No, that's super helpful. I know we're coming up. We got about 13 more minutes left. I usually like to open it up so that people can ask questions that are in the audience. And if this is your first time joining, the way you ask a question is just simply type your question in the comment section. So whether you're on Facebook or YouTube or Twitch or Twitter, wherever you're at, you can type a question in the comment section. And we'll try to get to as many as we can if there are questions. So I'll wait for a second to let you guys ask your question, and as you're typing those, is STEM still doing? Is there a B2B part? Are you guys like the because I know that part of your advantage is your tech, like you're a tech company. So I haven't used it myself, but I'm assuming it's very sleek and very kind of forward thinking tech. Is the tech that something that you white label out to labels, or are they using it?
Yeah, there are entire label groups that use STEM to both distribute and to be the sort of financial back end. That's a part of the business that's going to continue to grow, and may grow to a place where it's not just something that our distributed artists are using, but that artists that are distributed elsewhere or labels that are distributed elsewhere can still use STEM to visualize data, to make payments, to visualize different types of revenue, etc. So that's definitely where I think where it's going to head for us.
Got you. Cool. So we got a question here. He says, Shane asks, what are your thoughts on TikTok launching their own distribution service? And do you think they will be able to have an impactful presence in the saturated space?
Yeah. So this is really interesting, and it's sort of applicable to something that is going on at Spotify as well, called discovery mode. Basically, commercial programs that the DSPs have that you could participate in to try to amplify your presence on those platforms. I think it's really embryonic right now. It's hard to tell how these things are going to end up, and they're definitely polarizing, and they're sort of like big water cooler topics right now. I think we have seen both at TikTok and at Spotify some of these programs be successful, and for us, we have artists that may want to carve out TikTok so they can participate in that TikTok distribution program, but have STEM handle the rest of their distribution. We've seen that happen sometimes with success, sometimes with less success. I think it's a great forward-thinking question, but I think the verdict is out, still out at the time.
Got you. Got you. I think they didn't ask this question, but I'm going to ask it because I think they can use the answer to it. What are some of the interesting things that you've seen some of your artists do post release to keep the momentum going?
So I think one of the most important things is content creation, which could be audio content, visual content, social content, etc. So, for a song, uh, I'll use the example of TikTok since we're just talking about TikTok. I think, if you're going to post, if you have a new release and you're going to post about it on TikTok once, wrong. If you're going to post about it on TikTok twice, wrong. You look at what some of the other creators outside of the music space are doing on TikTok. They're pounding the same theme. Maybe it's a chef with the same recipe and they're cooking it in 10 different outfits. Or maybe, it's a comedian telling the same joke 10 different ways. I think you have to constantly be finding new angles to beat that song into people. So that could be with social content like that. That could be remix packages. That could be, different types of videos. It could be a live performance, a visualizer, a lyric video, then a real video, whatever it is. But I think it really starts with content creation, and not just, I think some artists get to a place where there's so much labor put into giving birth to a song that once it's out, they're just emotionally already on to something else.
Right.
But you really have to continue to work a song after release, continue to post about it, contests, whatever it is. You can't just. I see this so often with artists. By the time something actually is released, they are in the studio working on 2 projects later, and it's actually what they're working on in the studio that they're more excited about. And they're like, "Oh yeah, this is finally coming out." They're hyped. Send a couple links, whatever. But you have to treat each release. You have to be thinking about. It's not just that week leading up to release. It's 3 to 6 weeks after.
Right. Yeah, I think in general, artists move on way too quickly. And I know it might get boring. You might get tired of the same song, but in order to kind of cut through the clutter and really even just let all of your fans know that the song exists, just given that the algorithm restricts our reach and there's some songs that come out and your fans may not even know it came out because you didn't post it enough times for them to even see that a new song came out. So yeah, in general, people aren't promoting their release enough. But there's no, if it, I know there's no general rule. Every artist is going to be different in terms of like how much music they should release. But in general, like if you were working with an artist and let's just say, we don't have any other information, but how often they're going to release, how often would you prefer an artist to release? Monthly, every other month? What would your suggestion be?
The zone that feels right for me is every 6 weeks.
Mm.
When you start to get into this place where you drop a song, 6 months later you drop another song, you're losing momentum in between releases. And just because you are releasing 2 songs close to each other chronologically doesn't mean you can't continue to market and work the previous song. I mean, you see this all the time successfully in the dance space, for example, where an artist releases a commercial song that maybe has a vocal feature on it. And then just to keep the conversation going, they hit you they do a remix project, they do an instrumental club record, etc., because they want to keep themselves in the conversation top of mind. All the while, they're still working that commercial record. Maybe it's at radio, maybe it's being serviced to different panels, whatever it is, still out soliciting press opportunities, putting a remix package together. But I think artists often get nervous about, are my releases going to interfere with each other? They're going to run into each other. But that's an old mentality. Now you look at some playlists on Spotify, you see, an artist that may have 3 releases on the same editorial playlist, and they just keep going. So, to me, 6 weeks sort of feels like it's in the zone, but I think it's more important to be more frequent than it is less.
Right. Well, Seth, thank you, man. I really appreciate you joining us. Is there anything else, any gem you want to leave with our community? Anything that we didn't cover, maybe, or you could just let people know where to check out STEM or your personal socials if you're on social media like that. I'm not sure. Some people aren't.
Well, you definitely find out what our company's about at stem.is. My social handle on Instagram, on Twitter, it's at SL Faber. I think probably I'm more qualified to offer some advice to aspiring people aspiring on the business side, executives, etc. And one piece of advice that I got that I loved, that I always try to pass along: everybody I ever worked for in the business, just super passionate. They bled it, they ate it, they sweated it, they drank it, etc. And person said to me, "You want to work for a beast because then you'll become a beast." And I see a lot of people, that first job, boss is a little tough, expectations are a little high, they fold, they get overly sensitive. But from my perspective, working for somebody that kicks your ass and making you pay your dues and roll up your sleeves, get dirty, that's a good thing, because it's really going to help shape you, into somebody who really cares and wants to work hard. And I was lucky to work for some really challenging but exceptional executives, and I still am. And I would encourage people to embrace those types of personalities.
Nice. No, great advice. Well, again, thank you for joining us. I'm sure I'll be in touch. I appreciate everything that you shared today and learning your story. It looks like the community enjoyed it as well. So another dope discussion on a Monday to start your week. Hopefully everybody has a wonderful week, stack some wins, and I will see you guys next week. All right, Seth, have a good one.
Amen. Appreciate it, Dame. Thanks.
All good. Peace.